Hi, welcome back to our Human Resource Management series. Today we're talking about employee-employer relations, or relations between labor and management. There's a lot to go over, so let's jump right in. Okay, so employee-employer relations. To start off, let's read a dictionary definition. Now, don't worry, we're not just going to leave this definition, we'll play with it. But employee-employer relations refers to a set of private and public activities operating in a specified environment which is concerned with the allocation of rewards to employees for their services and the conditions under which these services are rendered. Oh my holy heck, are we really going to run with that? Well, here's the thing. What it really comes down to is employee-employer relations really talks about how employers and employees work together in the work environment and reward one another and recognize one another for the work done, for their accomplishments. And yes, it goes both ways. I understand that most of the time we think about employers rewarding employees, but employees can reward employers as well. So we're going to look at this two-way street. So first, from an organizational standpoint, why do we worry about relations? Well, we want to treat employees with dignity and respect, and if we do so, the outcome will be greater commitment and loyalty to the organization and ultimately better productivity. Also, with good communication between the parties, employees will understand the context in which they work and the mission of the organization and figure out how they can contribute in a meaningful way to the organization. In other words, they can figure out how to help the organization best reach its strategic objectives. Finally, workers today are knowledge workers, so they need knowledge. Employers must communicate effectively with employees to make sure that they have the right information at the right time and in the right way so that they can do their jobs. And that brings us to communication. Personally, I feel that effective communication is the key to good employer-employee relations. There's just no debating it in my mind. If we have good communication, good collaboration, good deliberation between the two sides, we're going to be able to come to an understanding and get the work done. Now, effective communication can be done in a variety of ways. We have the employee handbook, written, audiovisual, electronic meetings, yada, yada, yada. Here's the thing, though. These can all be very effective, very efficient communication channels, or they can be pretty darned atrocious. I mean, think about it. There's a whole mythology out there about the absolute Hades that meetings has become in corporate lore. And the same way when it comes to emails. We often feel like we get too many emails, and you may very well. However, all of these communication channels serve a purpose, and all of them can be effective. It is the responsibility of both management and the employees to understand how best to deliver the right information to the right people at the right time and in the right way, using the right communication channel. As I said before, if you do this well, then you're going to have excellent relations. Now, one of the reasons you really need good, strong communication channels is because you want to make sure that everybody understands the policies and procedures that exist between employees and the employer. You want to communicate the consequences of good and bad behavior, communicate grievances procedures to the employees should they have a grievance. You want to make sure that you protect the company as well as yourself and the employees against legal liability. You want to create a fair and consistent administration of policies. And finally, you want to establish methods of employee evaluation and rewards, methods that are effective and do what they're intended to do, which is increase productivity and happiness and thriving for the employee in the workplace. Now, communication is also key in giving and receiving feedback. Now, the purpose of employee feedback programs is to give employees a voice in decision making and policy formulation. Yeah, if you don't invite them to the table and give them an opportunity to contribute in this way, it's going to spell bad news later on down the road. You also want to empower employees in the workplace. Again, help them make the decisions and guide the direction of the departments. Also, you want to make sure that employees have due processes should they have any complaints. Once again, I want to re-emphasize the point that employee-employer relations and communication is a two-way street. It's a dialogue, not a monologue. Now, types of feedback that you can use as an organization to get employee feedback is employee attitude surveys, appeal procedures, employee assistance programs, suggestion systems. There really are many, many ways to solicit and encourage feedback from employees. That's not the problem. The problem is if you do nothing with that feedback. If you ask for feedback, receive it, and then do nothing with it, you are going to create a cynical workforce that does not feel like they have a voice. It's very important that when you receive feedback, you figure out what you're going to do with it, process it, and then report back to the employees what feedback you received and what you chose to do with it. That doesn't mean you need to act on every single suggestion. It does mean, however, that you need to explain what you did and why and how it aligns with the organization's objectives. Finally, communication is how organizations provide employee recognition. This way they can communicate that the organization cares about the employees and is willing to reward them for their efforts. So, examples of how organizations do this, well, you got bonuses, recognition, vacation time, special parking spots, events such as picnics and so on, maybe some swag if you ever got a coffee mug or something like that, gift cards, movie passes, plaques, certificates, the list goes on. These are all communication vehicles that allow the organization to recognize employees for a job well done. Okay, now we're going to shift a little bit and we're going to shift over to unions. This is a very specific aspect of employee-employer relations, one that is often born from leadership not doing its job properly. So let's play with this for a moment. So first of all, unionizing, what is it? Well, it's the effort by employees and outside agencies, i.e. unions, to band together and act as a single unit when dealing with management about issues related to the work. So collective bargaining, collective negotiation, things like that. Now, why do unions come about? Well, I'm going to make the assertion that unions come about mostly when organizations fail to step up and create an environment that allows employees to thrive and really excel and produce on their own, to really tap into intrinsic motivation. So, for example, if organizations give unrealistic job previews that create expectations that cannot be filled, or if they design jobs that fail to use the knowledge, skills, and abilities of employees that are compatible with their personal preferences for work, or maybe they create unfair treatment and or expectations of employees, or failing to show employees that they are committed to treating the workers with respect and include them as fellow decision makers at the table. If you don't do these things, it's pretty inevitable that employees are going to become disgruntled, and unionizing is one way that disgruntled employees try to figure out how to tip the scales of power toward their side. So with that definition in mind, let's look at the different types of unions. First, we have a union shop. This is when the employer can hire non-union workers, but the new employee must then join the union and pay dues after they're hired. So if I'm a union shop, I can hire anybody I want. However, the moment that person is hired, they are required to join the union and they must pay dues. That's a union shop. Another type of union is an agency shop. In this case, employees do not have to belong to the union for employment, but all employees, whether they participate in the union or not, must pay dues as though they were members. So, for example, let's say that you are an agency shop, you hire me, and I say, well, I don't want to join the union. That's fine, you don't have to join the union, but you still have to pay dues. The idea here is that whether you're a member of the union or not, the union is working on your behalf and negotiating in good faith to try to get you the best possible contract. And you're benefiting from that work. So whether you join or not, you're benefiting, ergo, you should pay dues. But then that brings us to an open shop. Here, employees can decide whether or not they want to join the union, and if they choose not to join the union, they do not have to pay dues. Now, in this case, unless the union can really make a superb, compelling case to employees that they should keep them around, unions are kind of at risk in this sort of situation, because if nobody has to join and nobody has to pay dues, well, they could wither on the vine. So unions have to make a really strong case to employees that they should join and pay. Well, all of this begs the question, what ways can a union exert power during, say, negotiation? Well, let's look at some of these. First, they can strike, and there are actually three kinds of strikes. There's an economic strike. This is when a union goes on strike for things like higher wages, shorter hours, or better working conditions. You can have unfair labor practice strikes. This is when a union strikes to protest unfair labor practices committed by the employer. Or you can have a sympathy strike. This is when one union strikes in support of another union involved in a different dispute with a different employer. So it's just kind of a way of showing camaraderie and banding together. Now, strikes are not the only ways that unions can exert power or even employ organizations, even if it's not a union. One way is you can slow down. Let's say that you're at work and you're normally working and producing really fast and moving like lightning and so forth. Well, in protest, you could have a work slowdown. Related to that is rule to work. The idea here is, you know what, let's face it, most of the things you do in the workplace, you have found the most efficient, path of least resistance way to do it. It may not necessarily be exactly as written in the book, but it gets the work done. Rule to work says, you know what, I am going to do everything exactly by the book. And the thing is, most of the time, exactly by the book does not mean very fast or efficient. It can really clog things up in a system. And then finally, you can have consumer boycotts. You could encourage consumers not to buy from the organization, not to do business with the organization as a show of solidarity with the workers. So with all that in mind, are you interested in organizing a union? Well, it's actually a pretty involved process. I have one slide here for it that does not begin to do it justice, but here's the idea. You have to contact a union and have a sign-up campaign. Employees can then vote whether or not to have the union represent them. If they vote to have the union come in and represent them, then the union starts to go into collective bargaining with the organization. Once you bring in the union, it is the union and the union only who can bargain with the company. Individual employees can no longer bargain. And then you come to a collective agreement. Everybody votes on the agreement. You adopt it, and it exists for how many ever years was agreed upon. Now, all of this involves a great deal of negotiation. Once a union is certified as the official representative of a bargaining union, it becomes the only party that can negotiate an agreement. As I said before, individual employees can no longer negotiate. Now, in the negotiation process, they'll talk about things like mediation, arbitration, or grievance procedures. Mediation is when a neutral third party assists the union and employer in reaching an agreement. So let's say that I'm the employer, you're the union, you and I cannot agree, we're just at loggerheads. Well, we'll have a neutral third party come on in and see if they can help, generate an agreement between us, mediate an agreement. Then you've got arbitration. This is when a neutral third party studies the bargaining situation, listens to both sides, and then makes recommendations that are binding on the parties. Recommendations that are binding basically says they decide. So, you and I'm the employer, you're the union, you're striking, I'm not agreeing, we're banging heads and so forth. And so arbitration says the arbiter comes in, looks at the situation, listens to both sides, and says, this is what you're going to do. You must do it. It's binding. I may not like it. You may not like it, but we're stuck. Obviously, you don't want to go to arbitration. And then you'll have grievance procedures. These are ways that we can resolve disputes over the application of the agreement. In other words, let's see if we can avoid arbitration. Mediation is fine, but we don't want to go to arbitration, so let's make sure we have some good grievance procedures in place. And so that is employee-employer relations in a nutshell. All right, so there you go. Yeah, we've all experienced the trauma and drama around employee-employer relations. Now you have a little bit better understanding of what's involved from both sides of the equation. All right, we're getting there, folks. Stick with us. We've got more to go over. We'll see ya.